Day 3 of the American Cup once again saw tons of drama as we had the first round of the elimination bracket, the semifinals starting in the champions bracket, and the completely unexpected tornado warning that turned the middle of the round into a bit of chaos. Hello everyone, I'm International Master Kostya Kavutskiy here, and I will be recapping all of the action daily from the American Cup taking place here in St. Louis. So starting with the bracket and the results, after yesterday's games, both the open and the women's section fields were split into two, with 4 players remaining in the champions bracket and 4 players being sent into the elimination bracket, where they will be fighting for their tournament lives. Starting with the champions bracket in the open section, Caruana versus Aronian saw the two draw both of their games, with each player pressing a little bit as white in their respective games. Once again, I'll remind you folks that in the champions bracket, the players are playing 2 classical games as well as 2 rapid games. So today, every player in the champions bracket played 1 classical game and 1 rapid game against their opponent. So Caruana against Aronian, those first 2 games were drawn, a classical and the rapid. In the other match, however, between Wesley So and Ray Robson, we saw Robson pulling ahead and taking a 1-point lead, 1.5, 0.5, after winning the rapid game in their match. Their first classical game was drawn. Ray then won the rapid game, and he'll again have a 1-point lead heading into today's games. He will need 2.5 out of 4 to knock Wesley into the elimination bracket and, of course, advance to the next stage. Going to the elimination bracket, we saw Sam Sevian defeating Grigory Oparin 3-1 and knocking Oparin out of the tournament. Sam was able to win games 3 and 4 in their rapid match. For those not familiar with the format, in the elimination bracket, they are playing 4 rapid games only, best of 4. If a player gets 2.5, they win the match. If it's tied after 2-2, the players then go to a blitz playoff, which actually ended up happening in an absolutely roller coaster of a match between Lenier Dominguez and Sam Shankland. The pair started off with 2 draws in the rapid games. Dominguez was in trouble in both of those games. Then he managed to win game 3, forcing Shankland in a must-win situation in game 4. Shankland came through with the black pieces, winning that game despite Dominguez having a winning position and taking the match into a blitz playoff. Then in the blitz playoff, the two once again split their first pair of games, with Dominguez winning the first game, Shankland again winning on demand in the second game, and finally in games 3 and 4 of the blitz playoff, Dominguez finally pulled through, winning game 3 and managing to win game 4 as well in order to knock Shankland out of the competition and advance to the next stage for Dominguez. Now heading to the women's section, both Irina Krush and Alice Lee managed to win their first 2 games in the champions bracket. Irina defeated Nazi Paikidze 2-0, first winning the classical game as white and then winning the rapid game as black. For Alice, the order of the colors was in reverse. She first won the classical game as black against Begim Tokyo-Genova, and then managed to win the rapid game as white as well in order to take a 2-0 lead in their match. So that means tomorrow both Nazi and Begim will have to score in both games, win both games, in order to force a blitz playoff in the champions bracket. Going to the elimination bracket in the women's section, Jennifer Yu bounced back from a tough match to defeat and eliminate Tatev Abrahamian 2.5 to half. And Zoe Tang, the youngster, managed to upset Anna Zatanski, the 4-time U.S. Women's Champion, to win that match 2.5 to 1.5, and thus sending Zatanski home as well. So that brings us to the games in this first game here. Caruana had white against Levon Aronian in their first classical game. And a bit of a surprise, Levon choosing the Grunfeld defense, something that I believe he hasn't played since his youth, basically. But he chose this opening in this game. And Caruana was able to get a bit of a small edge in this one, but ultimately wasn't really able to do a whole lot with his space advantage. Eventually, Levon managed to equalize, and this game was drawn. Now, somewhere around here in the first game between Fabi and Levon, something very peculiar happened. but the players, the media, the staff, everyone got sent down. The officials notified us there was actually a tornado warning in the middle of a round here in St. Louis. We had some thunderstorms today. We're known for our spirited weather. And yeah, tornado warning actually forced the arbiters to pause all the games that were ongoing. There was a couple of classical games going on, a couple of rapid games as well. All the players were forced to go downstairs and wait it out. Thankfully, it wasn't that long, but yeah, it was quite a bit of an awkward pause as a bunch of players just had to, stand around and wait for their games to resume. Thankfully for Levon and Fabi, their position here was already quite equal. They didn't have a ton to think about, and they eventually ended up just liquidating into a completely drawn rook and pawn endgame. This game was drawn, as was the second game in their match. This was a rapid game with Levon playing white. He had a bit of an advantage in the rook endgame, practically a very, very healthy advantage in the endgame, but did not manage to make the most out of it. Fabi was able to save the game, and so their match remains tied 1-1 heading into tomorrow's games. Going to the match between Wesley So and Ray Robson, their first classical game saw a bishop e3 Najdorf, with Robson going for this trendy knight to g4 line. Bishop g5 was played, h6. And the players kept it pretty equal for most of the game. Neither side, I would say, had much of a significant advantage. Eventually, a lot of pieces got traded off here as they went into an endgame. It was very, very close to equal here, and soon the sides repeated, and this first game was drawn. But that takes us to the first rapid game where Robson was actually able to pull ahead. This was a 15+10 game. And they had this Queen's Gambit decline structure. In this position, White is already doing actually quite well. Black's position is passive. Black also has some dark squared weaknesses, and White is in fact quite comfortable. But Ray played extremely well to convert this one, starting with the move b4 here, breaking on the queen side, and looking for a takes b4, queen takes b4 check, where the b pawn is hanging. Wesley tried knight d6, sacrificing a pawn and playing bishop f5, looking for some counterplay. But after takes, king f2, king g7, and a very provocative move from Ray, e4, blowing open the position with both kings a bit vulnerable, Ray actually ended up getting a very nice advantage here in the endgame. After de, he played d5 check. Wesley played queen f6 to try and get into the endgame. After takes, rook takes e4. Wesley, I think, committed a pretty serious mistake here. After rook takes e4, fe, knight d6, takes, and now rook to c1, a very, very nice move from Robson. This endgame ended up winning for White, as he has a very, very nice strategic advantage. After knight e4, knight c5, takes. This is a very difficult rook endgame for Black to hold, as White here is just kind of dominating. All of Black's pieces are passive, and Robson, despite just playing on the increment, was able to convert this one very, very nicely, bringing in his king, pushing h5, and eventually picking up the full point and taking, once again, a 1.5, 0.5 lead in this match. Heading to the elimination bracket, we'll start with the match between Sevian and Oparin. And the first two games in this match were very, very solid. That ended up in a draw, neither player having an advantage in either game. But in game 3, Sevian started to take over. Starting from this moment, this was quite a complicated English opening. Sevian opts for the exchange, bishop takes c5, hoping to leave White with a weakness on c5. Oparin threw in bishop takes f6, gf6, and bc5, probably should have taken with the queen and tried his chances in the endgame. After bc5, though, knight e6, all of a sudden Black's pieces here just become way too strong. Knight d4 coming soon. After knight d4, knight takes e2 check. This was just a disaster for White. E takes d3, and Black's position here was just way too good. Queen takes f6, queen takes c5 was played, and Sevian ended up winning this one thanks to his very, very strong passed d-pawn. That takes us to game 4, Sevian just needing a draw to clinch this 4-game rapid match, but he ended up getting a very nice position with White. This came out of a Catalan opening, and after his move e4 here, Sevian essentially seized the center here, got a very, very nice advantage, and was able to squeeze this one into another full point. Just fantastic play from Sevian here, especially for a rapid game. Knight f1, knight e3, just bringing all of the pieces into the game, now pushing d5. And it was just very clear that White's position here, the pieces were just fantastic. I want to show you guys one more moment from this game, although Sevian's technique here, I think, was absolutely flawless. b5, takes, trades rooks. Now bishop h3, the second bishop comes and joins the game, and White creates a huge target on e6 here. Queen e7 was played, and after takes, and rook a7, just an absolutely gorgeous shot, White was totally winning here. The point is, if you take the rook, which is kind of a forced move, White will play bishop takes e6 check, winning a pawn and winning back the rook on c8, ending up in this position where White has the bishop pair and an extra pawn and just a completely decisive advantage that Sevian was then able to convert. So that knocked Oparin out of the competition. Heading to the second elimination match, this one was just an absolute barn burner. This was the match between Dominguez and Shanklin. And once again, their first two games were drawn, just like in the other match, with Shanklin actually having chances in both games. Here in game 3, though, Lanier actually managed to seize the initiative, starting from this moment with a very nice move, knight to a5, where Black was initiating the counterplay against White's queenside, targeting the c-pawn. Shanklin tried g4 here in order to get some counterplay of his own, but after knight f6, takes, bishop f2, c5, Black essentially just started taking over here, and Lanier won. Just a very, very nice positional game here. After bishop d3, he trades off the pair of bishops, or at least sets it up. The c-pawn is hanging as well. And yeah, White just has no compensation for all of the weaknesses and eventually the material disadvantage. So Lanier was able to win this one, putting Shanklin in a must-win situation in game 4. Now, something very, very interesting happened here. Shanklin chose the Najdorf opening, which is, of course, very, very sharp. And Dominguez played, one of the absolute main lines, just going into a very, very sharp position here. Here, after Shanklin's move h6, Dominguez realized that this is actually a huge mistake, and he correctly and brilliantly sacrifices the knight on e6 here in order to expose Black's king. However, this is, of course, a huge risk in the position, as White is now sacrificing a piece. He only needs a draw to advance, and of course he puts a lot of pressure on himself to win this game. Now, objectively, the sacrifice was good, but Dominguez ends up blundering in this moment after rook h4, queen g3, and king to e8. White had a couple of very decent moves here. E takes d6 is quite strong, rook f1, for example, but not the move that Dominguez chose, knight to e4. Looks very natural, bringing the knight into the attack, but this allowed a very nice counter tactic from Shanklin. Knight c takes e5. The point is, after f takes e5, Black wins back the piece with bishop takes e4, and of course keeps the extra piece from earlier that White had sacrificed. With this material coming off, Dominguez did not have enough for the attack here, and very critical moment after bishop takes g5. This was key for Shanklin to see ahead of time. Queen takes g5, followed by bishop h6, gave Black the decisive advantage. Black forces a trade of queens after takes, bishop takes e4, d5. Although White did manage to win the piece back, after bishop d3, knight takes e5, this was a decisive endgame advantage. Black had an extra pawn. Shanklin soon took it to a rook endgame and then managed to convert, forcing the blitz playoff. Heading to the blitz playoff, Dominguez won the first game, then forcing Sam to once again win on demand to force another 2 games of blitz. This was the second game that Sam had to win. This one was quite exciting, so I'll quickly show you guys what happened here. In this position, White was doing quite well. For example, a move like rook to e5 here is quite reasonable, just putting the rook on a very good square. Instead, Shanklin started with the move f3, which is logical, controlling the e4 and g4 squares. But now after knight h5, all of a sudden White has problems. f4 is hanging, and you can't go g3 because the knight is hitting that square. So Shanklin goes rook e5, which seems necessary. But after f6, what do you do now? The rook is hanging as well as the pawn on f4. So kudos to Sam for his next decision here, g4. A lot of us watching the game are thinking rook takes h5, sacrifice the exchange like this. Didn't seem like there was enough. But g4 actually poses some very serious problems for Black. After f takes e5, f e5, The queen dropped back to e7, g takes h5. White has sacrificed an exchange here, but it's black's king that's opening up. Hg is in the picture, and this was ultimately, although objectively black is actually ahead here, over the board in practice with both players having seconds on the clock. Of course, anything can happen. And Shanklin ended up winning this game after check, king f1, hg, found a very nice move, rook e2, shuffling the rook over to the g file, and Dominguez ends up flagging in a difficult position here after king f2, rook f8, king e3. He didn't get his next move off in time, and Shanklin was able to strike back and once again equalize the score. That took us to the next two sets of blitz games here, and unfortunately for Shanklin, he ended up blundering in this one. Actually, earlier he had a very nice chance in this game to get an advantage, but at this point, playing white with relatively safe position, he unfortunately makes one of the worst moves in the position, f4, allowing Dominguez the unfortunate knight retreat, knight to d6, which is just game over on the spot, hitting the bishop, hitting the rook. White loses at least an exchange here, and the resulting endgame is completely lost. Having won this one, Dominguez then had white in that final blitz game. He managed to win that as well, clinching the match and sending Shanklin home. Very, very exciting match. Obviously, Shanklin had a lot of chances, but in rapid and blitz, of course, these things happen. Going on to the women's section, starting with the champions bracket. In the first game between Irina Krush and Nazi Paikidze, Irina managed to win a very, very nice game out of the Nimzo. In this one, we saw black actually struggling right out of the opening in the early middle game. It was around here Nazi played this move, queen to d7, allowing white to push e4 in the center. Already here, things are quite difficult for black. According to the engine, h5 was kind of the only move here in order to try and push h4 and remove the knight from g3. Not exactly an easy move to find. Also, anyways, after e4, white is still doing quite reasonably well here. So after queen to d7, e4, takes, knight e5, and queen to e2. Unfortunately for Nazi, she probably underestimated that after her knight has to move here from e5, Irina now has this absolutely thematic rook sacrifice. Rook takes f6, sacrificing the exchange in order to double the pawns in front of black's king, and of course leave black's king side just way too weak to survive here. After knight h5, d5, and c4, white basically just got everything for this exchange sacrifice, and it took some time to break through, but ultimately there wasn't a whole lot black could do here. Irina played a fantastic game to end up converting this one and taking a 1-0 lead in their match. But then Irina would go on to win the first rapid game as well, going up 2-0. Which means once again, Nazi will have to win both games tomorrow, first the classical, then the rapid, to force a blitz playoff in this match and try to stay in the champions bracket. Moving on to the other match in the champions bracket for the women, this was between Alice Lee and Begim Tokirjanova. And in this match, Alice managed to win the first game as black. We'll start here. This was just an absolutely wild game. I would strongly encourage the fans to go and check out the full broadcast from the day just to watch the end of this game, because it was quite something. A lot of action, a lot of pieces flying around. Of course, the players not having a lot of time. But this is the moment where Alice played the move e4, and she starts to take over this game. Just a very, very powerful breakthrough here. Of course, the idea is that if white takes with the pawn, then black will advance d3 and open up the bishop on c5, where white is in huge trouble. After takes, knight takes e4, takes, and now rook t8. Black's position here was just fantastic, and eventually this d pawn ends up winning black the game. It soon advances to d3 and eventually even to d2. In the meantime, Begim tries to get this counterplay on the king side. Another very nice move here from black, a4, softening up the c4 pawn. This gave Alice a second pass pawn on the b file here. And yeah, just an absolutely mess of the game. You can see white is just going all in on the king side, but there was never enough play for Begim. Alice was basically always in control over the position. And eventually, after a lot of complications, we had an exchange sacrifice, white's pawn getting to d7, but being kept under control by the black bishop, and a couple of repetitions there. G7, definitely Begum should have kept repeating here with the move queen to G4. I don't think she was necessarily playing for a win in the position. I think she just didn't like her position, is my take on things, and just wanted to make a different move rather than continuing to repeat in a tough position. But G7 ends up being a very serious mistake here, as after the move D2, Alice is now finally able to promote one of her pawns. The threat is B1 equals queen. That wasn't the end of the story. Queen to G3 was played, threatening a very nasty check on B8, followed by promoting or queen H8 check with inevitable mate. Bishop to D8 was played, a very clutch move. And now the problem for white is if queen to B8 is played, that allows queen takes H3 with a quick checkmate. So queen B8 no longer possible. Queen G4 was tried. But now queen to D5 once again. Queen went back to G2, and B1 equals queen. Point of this one is if rook takes B1, then of course black is playing D1 equals queen and wins the game in short order. So a very, very nice win for Alice in the first classical game. Then she won the rapid game as white as well to take a 2-0 lead in their match. Going to the elimination bracket, first we saw Jennifer Yu knock out Tadev Abrahamian. This was their first game where Jennifer played quite well, and she finds a nice sequence of moves here to eventually finish off the game. Starting with this one, bishop to F8. Both players at this point under 30 seconds, so of course we're entering a very nervy time scramble. But this was a nice retreating move, not just defending black's kingside here, but also setting up bishop H6, where it turns out that black's dark sword bishop is just the absolute star piece in the position. In the meantime, black also has lots of counterplay on the queen side. Tadev tried to get something going on the king side with H4 and H5, but this was simply just not in time. Bishop H6, knight E3, bishop to B5, all of black's pieces getting into the game. Queen B6, rook E1 was played in order to defend the knight. Bishop dropped back. And here Tadev tried knight to G4. Reasonable decision after bishop takes D2, for example. In case of queen takes D2, then white has some compensation for the exchange. Knight F6 check is coming, queen H6, and so on. But instead of taking the exchange, Jennifer found a much stronger move. Queen takes B2, taking advantage of the pin along the diagonal. Of course, this queen cannot be taken. And after king D1, queen takes B1. Black was simply winning way too much material here, and this was game over. They then drew the second game in their match, but Jennifer managed to win the third game, this time as white. This was the final moment here that kind of decided things. In this position, Tadev made the unfortunate move rook to F4, where after rook to D4, a very nice move, white was able to create just this deadly pin along the fourth rank. Black had no way to get out of it. Eventually, Tadev had to actually just give up the bishop with this move H5. Hoping to trade off all the pawns and get a drawn rook versus rook and knight endgame. But Jennifer's technique here was too good. She was able to, of course, keep her pawn. Finds a very nice move here, rook E6 check. The point that if king takes A5, there's B4, followed by rook takes A6 mate. And after this, it was pretty straightforward for white. The king just gets pushed back way too far. Knight C6 check, king to B4. And after knight A5 check, Tadev decided to resign as white's king is coming in, and black is soon going to get mated. For example, king A7, rook E7 check, the king has to go to the back rank, then white's king will walk in, and it's all over. So with a 2.5 win, Jennifer stays in the tournament, and she, along with everyone else in the elimination bracket, will get a rest day tomorrow before playing the next day. Going into the final match, we saw a very, very dramatic match between Zoe Tang and Anna Zatonski. Now, Zoe here in the first game ends up winning with a very nice sequence of moves. She goes G4 in this position. With an extra pawn in the endgame, she correctly gives the pawn back. Actually, very impressive calculation, with less than a minute on her clock. She plays G4 here. HG is absolutely forced. And after bishop to G5 check, we see black's idea, king to D3. She goes bishop takes D2, heading into the king and pawn endgame. And after king to E4, Zoe correctly realized that black is actually winning this one due to the activity of the king. Problem for white is, although they have this outside pass pawn, it is simply too slow. After king f5, black will win the pawn and then have time to hold on to the extra e-pawn. Anna tried the absolute best chance she had here, king e2. King f4 was played, king to d3. Now if king takes g4, king e4, it'd actually be white who's possibly winning this, as the king is closer. But instead, e4 check was quite precise. King d4, e3, and now black's pawn is just way too fast. And after g5, e2, this was game over. So Zoe wins the first game. She was also able to win the second game thanks to a nice tactic here on move 27. White to play. She finds a very nice move. Rook takes f6. The point is, if black takes with the pawn, then there's going to be knight h6 check, picking up the queen thanks to the fork. And after rook takes f6, the second rook comes in, again with the same idea. Black is forced to sidestep with queen to e7, but now queen to g6, all of white's pieces coming in, knight e4, and another very nice move to win the second game, rook f7, threatening mate on g7, and of course, taking advantage of the fact that queen takes is met with knight h6 check. White wins the queen and the game. After winning these first two games, Zoe then lost the third game, and Anna was actually winning the fourth game as white. Had she won that game, she would force a blitz playoff. She ended up messing it up. The game was drawn, and Zoe was able to advance 2.5, 1.5, and knocking Anna out of the tournament. So that takes us to day 4 of the American Cup. In tomorrow's round, the players in the elimination bracket will actually have a rest day as they wait for the ongoing matches in the champions bracket to finish up. So tomorrow we'll see Fabi against Levon, the conclusion of their match, as well as Wesley So against Ray Robson. Robson leading by 1 point in that match. Then in the women's section, we'll see both Irina and Alice trying to clinch their matches. Currently, they're up 2-0 against Nazi Paikidze and Begim Toker Genova. Should be another absolutely thrilling day of chess. Thanks so much for tuning in. You'll catch me in the next recaps here as well. And until next time, this has been International Master Kostya Kavutskiy signing off. Take care.